800 years ago, on a sandy marsh in the middle of a windy plain, building began. The story of Berlin and its buildings has been one of visionary creation, but also terrible destruction. More than any other city, Berlin has, over the centuries, been a place where men have cast their dreams in stone. Now, more than half a century after the Second World War and 20 years after the fall of the wall, Berlin is still a work in progress. The forest of cranes suggests a new version of the city is rising. But in Berlin, nothing is simple.
Berlin is a city where the past and the future just keep colliding. I love this place. It fascinates me. But as a German, I also feel that some of its buildings, perhaps inevitably, inspire feelings of guilt. In fact, I can't really think of another city in the world where the morality of the architecture has been so heavily scrutinized and mulled over as here in Berlin. On the morning of the 3rd of May, 1945, weary Berliners emerged bleary-eyed from their cellars and their bomb shelters. And then it suddenly dawned on them. The war was over, but so was Berlin. What had been a proud metropolis in stone had now been reduced to a city of dust.
For Berliners, this terrible moment would become known as Stunde Null, or 0 hour. The victorious Allied commander soon arrived. What Winston Churchill saw was an apocalyptic landscape that shocked even him. British Air Marshal Arthur Tedder had come to the city to accept the formal surrender of the Germans. He compared Berlin to a ruined classical city. In his opinion, it would never be rebuilt. At the center of this devastation was the wreck of a building familiar to all Berliners, and that felt as old as the city itself. The Berliner Schloss. This is the Schloss in the 1930s. It was a royal palace and had been home to Berlin's rulers for centuries. It was the heart of Berlin. By 1945, the Schloss stood for the fate of the city itself. Once the center of an imperial power, now reduced to a blackened shell.
Es war alles grau. Es war alles so zerstört, Ruinen. Und der Rest, der nach dem Krieg noch stand vom Schloss, war für mich ein bedrückender Klops.
After the war, control of the city was divided, with the Russians in charge of the east and the west controlled by the Americans, the British and the French. So in effect, there were now two Berlins, east and west. But facing both sides were millions of tons of rubble. Each Berlin sought to use the rubble creatively, as a building material, but also as a political tool. In Treptower Park, East Berlin, stands a vast memorial to the 5,000 Russian soldiers who died in the Battle of Berlin. Completed in 1949, the Soviet War Memorial used slabs of red marble from Hitler's chancellery, destroyed at the end of the war. The Russians recycled the stone that had formed the core of Hitler's world and created a memorial that was designed to make the victor feel proud and the vanquished pathetic. But the Russians weren't the only ones looking to make a point with the spoils of war. On the western edge of the city, the British and American authorities used their rubble to create a hill. But this was no ordinary hill, and in the difficult years that were to come, it would prove of great strategic value.
Woo! Bloody hell! Freezing! Windy! Amazing! Look at this! Look at this stuff! It's like a sail, but of course this was once all completely enclosed. Not nearly as noisy. In fact, it was silent because everyone here would be listening to what was going on over there. This was a listening post in the Cold War for what was going on in the East. Apparently they could listen to conversations being held 300 miles that direction. This is amazing. Call me weird, but I love this place. Question is, what do you do with it? No one here can agree. I mean, there have been several suggestions. Turn it into a museum, leave it exactly as it is, make it into a hotel. Why not have a spa? But no one here can agree. And the reason is that in Berlin, the act of demolition is just as politically and emotionally charged as the act of construction. It's the curse of this city.
In the aftermath of the war, the need for new homes for the thousands of homeless Berliners became paramount. It was a race, West versus East, to create a new model city that represented their way of thinking. The socialist boulevard of Stalinallee, now called Karl Marx Allee, was a long, wide, processional avenue in East Berlin, constructed by thousands of willing workers. Many of the builders and their families were given apartments. Gerhard Walensky still lives there.
Das war natürlich, gerade für uns junge Eltern, war das märchenhaft. Ne?
Und beschreiben Sie mir, wie das hier war, dieses Gebäude in der Karl-Marx-Allee zu bauen.
Wir waren eine Jugendbrigade, alles junge Leute. Wir haben unsere Witze gemacht, unsere Scherze gemacht. Aber es hat eben Freude gemacht.
Das war also, Sie haben wirklich das Gefühl gehabt, dass Sie beim Wiederaufbau von Berlin eine Rolle gespielt haben.
Ja. Also das war wirklich ein Gefühl, gebraucht zu werden. Nicht?
The response in West Berlin was ambitious and radical. The Interbau project brought together 48 renowned architects. Their task was to design social housing for the Hanseviertel district that had been decimated by bombs.
Es erschien uns sehr, sehr modern. Da waren wir fassungslos vor Glück. In diesem zerstörten Berlin, wo es schon ungeheuer problematisch war, eine normale Wohnung zu finden, hatten wir dieses Haus. Heute schließe ich die Tür und schließe damit alles, was an der Stadt unsympathisch ist. und gehe rein wie in ein gehütetes Nest. Ich fühle mich sehr, sehr beschützt in dem Haus. Umarmt.
But the two new Berlins didn't define themselves by construction alone. The destruction of old buildings also became a creative and political act. Berlin's ruined royal palace, the Schloss, came in the firing line. Its remains stood in East Berlin, and the communist authorities there decided that with its imperial past, it represented the wrong kind of history. Progress. The forest of cranes suggests a new version of the city is rising. But in Berlin, nothing is simple.
Berlin is a city where the past and the future just keep colliding. I love this place. It fascinates me.
800 years ago, on a sandy marsh in the middle of a windy plain, building began. The story of Berlin and its buildings has been one of visionary creation, but also terrible destruction.
On the morning of the 3rd of May, 1940...
More than any other city, Berlin has, over the centuries, been a place where men have cast their dreams in stone. Now, more than half a century after the Second World War and 20 years after the fall of the wall, Berlin is still a work in...
But as a German, I also feel that some of its buildings, perhaps inevitably, inspire feelings of guilt. In fact, I can't really think of another city in the world where the morality of the architecture has been so heavily scrutinized and mulled over as here in Berlin.